In the first camera print, one of the things that we talked about is optimizing the raw image. And there was a severe limitation in Lightroom and Camera Raw at that time. You couldn't do localized adjustments.
Right.
So we did the taking it from Lightroom back into Photoshop to do localized adjustments. Now in Lightroom and Camera Raw, you can parametrically do localized adjustments using the gradient filter and the adjustment brush. And I know that you've got an interesting demo of how you use it.
Yeah, I don't use it all the time. It was interesting as we were trying to find a shot that would be appropriate. We probably went through 20 where I hadn't used it, and here I used it a lot.
Yeah.
So this is a shot that I did in the backyard of an antique store that sold religious antiques. And this is obviously a Christ figure with the nail hole through the hand. And what struck me here was it's fairly monochrome, but there's a little bit of red around the nail hole in this wooden arm.
Ironic or symbolic, one of the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now here is what I ended up with. Again, an interpretation. And what I wanted to do was accentuate the fact that it had that little bit of red paint on there to simulate the blood. But I wanted to remove everything else. And again, this is part of the process of interpreting.
The distillation process.
Exactly. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but what I'd like to illustrate, this long scrolling list, is this is where I started. This is where I ended up. But what I wanted to do is press the K key, which is for the brush. And of course, that's a really logical mnemonic, K for brush. But
there are only
so many letters in the
letters in the
I know.
alphabet.
But that's one of the ways I remember it, is, oh yeah, K for brush.
Yeah.
And if we now hold the mouse, hover the mouse over, you'll see the areas that I brushed. And what I did was, that was to brighten this area. What did I do here? That was to desaturate it. What did I do here? This is the area that was covered.
And it's also interesting to note the auto mask. Some people love it, some people hate it.
I love it.
If you use it judiciously, it's very, very good. If you're trying to take a bright white sky and try to paint it blue, it ain't gonna work.
No.
It's actually based on the background eraser in Photoshop. So what you do is when you paint, what is absolutely critical is that the crosshair, the center crosshair, remain in the area that you want to adjust. The moment it goes out of that area into another area, then the logic expands the area. So,
but you can see it was very effective
Yes.
here, but I went slightly outside here, and I went slightly outside here, but so what?
yeah.
So let's see what this one was. Okay, again, this one here was
Desat
and
massive darkening.
darkening, and this one here was a little bit of negative exposure. So again, the whole point here was all I wanted to do was have the hand, a bit of context, and that little bit of color, so I desaturated everything else. And by the way, I should point out, this is not a tutorial in Lightroom.
Yeah.
We have a whole Lightroom tutorial that if you have not already purchased it, it would be a pretty good idea.
Learn how
to do this.
How to do this.
But again, the reason we're mentioning it here, as you said, is because these kind of localized corrections were not in our previous camera to print tutorial.
Correct. And then the other thing is, that's really, in essence, how you're optimizing the image, distilling it down. You know, I noticed one of the things, of course, in your history was, yet again, massive amounts of different cropping. No, I think that's cute.
Well, here, let me go through it.
Yeah.
So here's where we started. This was next, this was next, and people can see on the screen the things that I've done. Again, I wasn't sure that I wanted to go through it.
Any idea at what point you kind of thought, I'm going to go the desaturation route?
Well, you know, the whole desaturation thing, I'm not sure, I don't really recall, but the whole desaturation thing has kind of become a bit of a trademark of mine.
Yeah.
I just like doing it.
Yeah.
I like working in black and white. I like working in color. And I guess it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, it's a hybrid. It's a little bit like the old days before color, where people would hand paint. You know, and you'd do something where the background was monochrome and the flowers were painted, and I just like that look.
Back in school, it was called spot of color.
So,
Cool.
yeah, there you are.